Hi, and welcome to Messy-nism, the Jewish understanding of Moshiach, episode 4. This week we look at extra-biblical and non-canonical sources that discuss Moshiach. We trace the references to Moshiach ben Aharon found in the Dead Sea Scrolls to a source in Zechariah, and eventually back to Yetziat Metzrayim. We explore an Aggadah where Yonatan ben Uziel is prevented from producing a targum of Ketuvim for fear of disclosing the meaning of the psukim in Daniel, which would reveal the arrival of Mashiach. But then we ask if the date of the arrival is really a fixed, quantifiable piece of data or not. Finally, we begin to explore a series of aggadot from Sanhedrin on what will happen in the generation of the advent of Mashiach. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoy these shiurim, rather than leaving a review, please consider telling a friend about them.
So the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they were found in caves in Qumran, which is kind of on the border, we'll say, between Jordan and Eretz Yisrael. It seems like there was a group of people that lived there who were outside the mainstream of, we'll call, like, traditional Judaism. The name they gave to them is the Essenes. These were people who held some kind of funky out there beliefs, like we should just have an all-male society. They didn't hold of the Kohen in the Beis HaMikdash. There is record, so we have 23 out of the 24 books of Tanakh accounted for in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The only one, welcome, the only book from Tanakh that we don't have in the Dead Sea Scrolls is Megillas Esther. Now, it's important to mention that lack of evidence is not evidence of lack. Just because there's no Esther doesn't mean they didn't hold of Esther. There could be lots of reasons, like it just didn't get preserved well. They also have like all kinds of other funky stuff, like the rule of law. They have this whole story of the sons of light and the sons of darkness, and that's kind of their version of Gog and Magog. We're just talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then we'll get into what the Dead Sea Scroll says about Mashiach. So and the script is the Paleo Hebrew script. It's the original, the script before it was changed, before the Assyrian script that we have in our Sifrei Torah today. So
why don't we still use that script?
It was changed.
Why?
When they brought it back. When they came back from Bavel, they brought the Assyrian script and the names of the months and a few other things. Okay, so why am I bringing?
We have a more genuine script. It's in the original Sefer Torah. Why don't we use that?
Because Ezra canonized the script as okay, so I don't know if it's Ezra or if it just became used based on like what was common knowledge. Like there was one script that was reserved for the scribes and the elite, and another that was like what everybody used. So the more you go with why is the Gemara in Aramaic instead of in Hebrew? Even the Yerushalmi is in Aramaic because that's the language that the people who were the subjects. You know, that was their lingua franca, as they say. Okay, so
I don't like it.
Noted for the record.
And I insist we change back.
Yes. So we talked about, I think, way back when we first started, that how many Mashiachs are we expecting? That your options are 0, 1, 2, or more than 2. How many?
Well, there could be 2 Mashiach ben David,
So Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef is the most common answer, right?
So there could be 2 Mashiach ben David.
We're going to get to that. So Mashiach ben Yosef comes from the Gemara in Sukkah. There is in the Dead Sea Scrolls a reference to a second Mashiach, but that is not a Mashiach ben Yosef. That is in the
Mashiach ben Menashe.
No.
Mashiach ben Ephraim.
This is in, so if you ever come across texts that are referencing the Dead Sea Scrolls, you'll get these very weird looking listings. So they essentially parse out as follows. You'll see something like 4Q174, right? 4Q174 means the fourth cave. So 4 Qumran, that's the Q. So fourth cave, and then of the jugs that are there, it's the 174th. That's where it sounds like it's like Army code or something, but that's essentially what it is. So they give some of these texts that they found there really interesting names, and the one that we have here is called the Florigelium, which to me sounds like something in the ocean, but it's mentioned there also in the Community Manual of Discipline. There we get two Mashiachs. One is Mashiach ben David, Mashiach Shel Yisrael, and the other is Mashiach ben Aharon, a Mashiach from Aharon. And that, I think, traces back to a prophecy we get from Zechariah. So in Zechariah, I want to say chapter 4. I think it's chapter 4. Let's see. Okay, so just briefly on Zechariah. Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi are the last of the Nevi'im. By the time that they're prophesizing, prophecy is on its way out. And I think we talked about this a little bit when we were doing Daniel. The prophecy that these Nevi'im get is not clear. It's, when you get Nevuah from Shmuel, it's very clear. From Moshe Rabbeinu, here's what you do, here's what you don't do. It's very direct, very informative. Even when you get to like Yechezkel, when you're starting in the exile, he starts to see these visions, and it's hard to understand exactly what he's seeing. When you get to Zechariah, not only do you and I not understand what he's seeing, Rashi and Ibn Ezra are like, don't ask us what this whole thing is about because we have no idea. That's okay, because the other person who has no idea what he's seeing is Zechariah himself. So Zechariah himself multiple times will see a vision, and the Malach who's showing him this vision is like, so you get it? And Zechariah's like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. In one of those visions, we get this menorah. It is in chapter 4. Look at me. Vayeshev hamalach hadover bi vayir'eni ki'ish asher yaor mishnaso. So this Malach who's speaking to me, he wakes me up like someone who's sleeping. And you're going to get this vision of a menorah, and that's why we read this as the Haftorah for Baloscha and Chanukah. V'yomer elai ma ta ro'eh, v'yomer ra'isi hine menorah zahav kula v'gula al rosha v'shiva nerosaha aleha shiva v'shiva mitzukos la neros asher al rosha. I see a lampstand of olive gold with a bowl above it. The lamps are 7 in number, and lamps above it have 7 pipes. Ushnaim zeisim aleha, and there are these 2 olive trees on either side of this menorah. Picture of exactly what this menorah looks like. This is an artist rendition of. So you've got the trees on either side. You have, these are bowls that are collecting oil from the trees, and this is the menorah that they're all feeding into. Ushnaim zeisim aleha echad mimin hagula ve'echad al smola, on the right or the left. V'yan v'yomer al hamalach hadover bi le'mor ma eila adoni. What are these? V'yan hamalach hadover bi v'yomer elai halo yadat ma hema. Don't you know what these are? V'yomer lo adoni. And he says, no, I have no idea what I'm looking at actually. V'yan v'yomer elai le'mor. So the Malach answers him, Zed var Adonai el Zerubbabel le'mor lo b'chayav lo b'koach ki im beruchi amar Adonai tzvaos. This is the word of Hashem to Zerubbabel. We're going to touch on that, who that person is, in a minute. Not by might, not by power, but by my spirit, says Hashem, Lord of hosts. That is how Hashem's influence is going to come into the world. So who is Zerubbabel?
Gidon.
Interesting. No.
He's called Zerubbabel.
Right, but who's the Zerubbabel that we're talking about over here? This is.
Oh no, he's called Zerubbabel. Sorry.
Yes. Who's the Zerubbabel that we're talking about over here?
I don't know.
So Zerubbabel, we have it in the Mausur, Kates Bavel, Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was one of the leaders of the Jewish people who came back with Ezra to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. He came from the lineage of David HaMelech and was in line to be the next king of the Jews. Meaning, if anybody woulda, coulda, shoulda been Mashiach, at least in the times of Ezra, it was Zerubbabel. So what we have in Zechariah, and earlier than that, we have the Kohen whose name escapes me. I want to say it was Elazar HaKohen. In the third parak, right before this vision, there's a vision of Elazar the Kohen Gadol standing with dirty clothes, and the Satan is about to complain against him, and God stops the Satan from talking. So what you're getting from the imagery over here is there are two tributaries that are going to be anointed: the Kohen Gadol, Elazar Kohen Gadol, and Zerubbabel. So that, I believe, is where the Dead Sea group gets their idea of having two Mashiachs. Mashiach means anointed with oil. The two people described in Zechariah as being anointed by oil are the Kohen Gadol and the Mashiach, the king of the Jews, who was supposed to be Zerubbabel. Now, that's we'll call it educated conjecture. Now we'll go for some less educated conjecture. Where does this idea that you have two sort of leaders who are anointed by oil come from? I believe the paradigm for that is Moshe and Aharon. That at the beginning of the Jewish people's exodus, the Geula, right? The Jews were redeemed from Galus in Mitzrayim. So the paradigm for that and the leadership at that time were Moshe and Aharon. And Moshe and Aharon were anointed. They were consecrated as part of the consecration of the Mishkan. So that is your template for every Geula and building of the Beis HaMikdash, which is what Zerubbabel was there to do, and what Mirz Hashem Mashiach is going to be there to do, is to have a Kohen who is anointed, and to have a leader, a king, a Moshe Rabbeinu type of person who is also going to be anointed. And that's why eventually it morphed from Mashiach ben Aaron and Mashiach ben David to a Mashiach ben Yosef, or Mashiach ben Ephraim, and we'll get to more of that in a little bit. That was a lot to digest. Does that make sense? Did we follow the train backwards?
For the most part. Just
Okay.
say the last part again.
So the idea is that the template for all redemptive redemptions is Yetziat Metzrayim. Right. So in Yetziat Metzrayim you had Moshe and Aharon. So that template gets followed through in Zechariah as Elazar and Zerubbabel, and then that template gets perpetuated in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where you have Mashiach ben David, or Mashiach Shel Yisrael, and Mashiach ben Aaron. And then we'll see how that morphs from Mashiach ben Aaron to Mashiach ben Yosef. Okay. There's not a lot else in what's called the Apocrypha, meaning the non-canonical books of Tanakh, at least not in the Jewish canon. There's not a lot of discussion of Mashiach, which is actually very interesting. It's really not until you get to the Christian Testament that you start seeing more of a talk about a Messiah, and I believe that's what has perpetuated some of the discussion that we're going to see in Chazal, that there was a need to say, we hear what you believe, here's what we believe. Okay, so without further ado, what you have in your handouts is what I wanted to do was, instead of like going through every Gemara that we could find about Mashiach, because we'd be here forever, I just basically took three daf in Sanhedrin that talk about Mashiach extensively, not Sota, and I figured we would go through that just as a sampling. There's one other Gemara that I want to touch on, but just to wrap up what we were talking about before. So if we're going in chronological order, we've gone through the Psukim, we've talked through the material that is outside of the Jewish canon, the Apocrypha, the Dead Sea Scrolls. What we haven't talked about are mentions of Mashiach in Josephus and Philo. Josephus and Philo are living in the 1st century of the Common Era. From, let's say, Josephus is the year 50 and Philo is maybe the year 70, something like that. So they do both talk about Mashiach characters, and when we get to after we finish Chazal, what I'd like to do is just start from the year 0 and go through all the different claimants to the title of Mashiach historically. So that's why I'm kind of putting them on the side. Okay, so before we do the packet that's in front of you, I wanted to do one Gemara in Megillah. And the reason for that is really just as an excuse to talk about targum. So the Gemara in Megillah on 3a says as follows, and I'll just read it to you inside briefly. Targum shel Neviim. Okay, who wrote the targum of the Chumash? Onkelos Hager, right? Okay, we'll dig into that in a little bit. Who wrote the targum of Navi? Yonatan ben Uziel.
Yeah.
Who wrote the targum on Ketuvim? So the answer is definitely not Yonatan ben Uziel. That's what we're going to see from this Gemara. Targum shel Neviim Yonatan ben Uziel. The targum of the Navi was written by, who is Yonatan ben Uziel, by the way? Besides the person who's buried in Amukah. Where does he sit in the chain of Masorah? So he is the greatest student of Hillel. Like Hillel and Shammai Hillel Hazaken. So Yonatan ben Uziel was his greatest student. And he wrote the Targum, the translation into Aramaic, for the Nevi'im.
Is he the one that would make birds spontaneously combust?
Right. Amru mipnei Chagai Zechariah Malachi. So he started translating the Targum, but it was really based on the guidance of the Nevi'im Chagai Zechariah Malachi, who kind of bequeathed a lot of this information to Yonatan ben Uziel. The Nizdaza Eretz Yisrael Arba Meos Parsa. And when Yonatan ben Uziel starts his translations, the earth, the Eretz Yisrael, is shook for 400 parsangs. Al Arba Meos Parsa. Excuse me. Yotza Baskol V'Amra Mihu Shegila Sistrikuk Libnei Adam. Who is the one that is coming to reveal the secrets to mankind? Amad Yonatan ben Uziel Araglav. So Yonatan ben Uziel stands up on his feet. Amr Anihu Shigalisi Sisrecha Libnei Adam. I'm the one who revealed your hidden secrets to man. Golav Yadu Lefanecha. It's known and revealed before you. Shelo Lichvodi Asisi V'lo Lichvo Beis Abba. It wasn't for my own honor. It wasn't for the honor of my family. El Lichvodecha Asisi. I did this for your honor, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Shelo Yirbu Machlokas B'Yisrael. So there should not be an increase of Machlokas in Yisrael. So that's what happens after he translates Navi. V'od bikesh legalos targum shel Ketuvim. And now Yonatan ben Uziel is like, okay, well that went well. Let me proceed to finish Tanakh off, right? Yotza Baskol v'Amra. Baskol comes out and says, Lo dayecha, for you it is enough. My time, says the Gemara. Why did this Baskol come out and tell him, like, that's it, put a pin in it? Mishum de'is beik hates Mashiach, because it is revealed in the Ketuvim when exactly Mashiach will come. Now, where in Ketuvim is it revealed exactly when Mashiach will come?
Somewhere in the back.
So we learned it in Sefer Daniel, right?
Yeah.
In Sefer Daniel, it talks about when Mashiach will come, and it's
mentioned
It's mentioned in a very cryptic way. There's these 70 weeks and time and times and halftime, right? Okay, so a few interesting things to point out. The first thing is we have a principle, which I'm sure you're familiar with from the famous story of the oven of Achnai, that the principle is lo b'shamayim hi. The Torah is not in heaven, right? Mm-hmm. So if Yonatan ben Uziel, if Yonatan ben Uziel gets a baskol that says stop translating, does he have to stop translating? It would appear not, right?
Which means that Rebbe Elisha ben Abuya should not have listened to the Baskol.
Also true. Anyway. Also true. Now it's an interesting conversation.
Well, you to listen, maybe maybe you got struck by lightning.
Right. So that's a great point. You might the way you can sort of divide it is lo b'shamayim he is a halachic. Right. But doesn't mean don't take into account when God says don't do something.
Right.
I think that's definitely a fair argument. The other thing that is kind of interesting is if you were there and maybe you took Yonatan ben Uziel out for drinks, did he know the date? Could he have told you the date? He just wasn't allowed to write it down, or he would not know. Like, is the information known or unknown?
It's unknown. Yaakov knew, but if he didn't tell the stuff, then
Right.
how does everybody else know going forward?
Right. So
It's our end.
yeah, I would assume the way I'm comfortable understanding the whole concept. Ezzy, no. Ezzy, no. The way I would like to present the concept is there is no set date for Mashiach. It's not like if you sat down with Yonatan ben Uziel, he would tell you, oh yeah, it's on the 23rd of Tammuz, Tafshin, Pei Gimel. And there are many times where the Gemara will say, well, this person could have been Mashiach except XYZ happened, right? There's an opportunity for Mashiach to come in many times and in many ways. What Yonatan ben Uziel would have divulged, I think, in his translation is part of what's involved in that criteria. I don't think he would have given you a specific, date and time for the arrival of Mashiach. Okay. The reason I bring this one Gemara up outside of Sanhedrin is because I want to take a few minutes to talk about targum in general. What is targum? Who gets to write one? How many are there? And do we hold by all of them? So we already talked through the two famous ones. There's Onkelos, who wrote on the Chumash, and Yonatan ben Uziel, who wrote on Navi. I'm hoping people are aware that Onkelos is not just, there is no such thing as just a pure translation. Every translation is commentary. Mm-hmm. So Onkelos there's a number of patterns in how he translated that reflect his commentary. Although Onkelos, I think, is probably the closest to Pshat, like the straightforward interpretation of the psukim as they were meant to be read. Pshat, the concept of Pshat is not always so pashut, but one of the things that Onkelos does, are we upstairs? Are we familiar with any of the methods of commentary that Onkelos has? One of the things he does is, in general, avoids anthropomorphism. So if there's ever a time where it says the Yad Hashem this or the Aharon off that, Onkelos will go out of his way to translate in a way that doesn't imply that God has any corporeality. Another thing that he does is side with Rabbi Shmuel over Rabbi Akiva. That Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva have a machlokes, Dibra Torah Kalashon B'nei Adam or not, right? Does the Torah speak in the language of man, and therefore sometimes you'll get repetition of words, or you'll get phrases that are imprecise because that's how people talk. So Rabbi Akiva holds that no, that's not the case. Every letter and every word have meaning, and Rabbi Shmuel holds that no, there are times where you'll get repetition just because that's part of how people talk, and Onkelos seems to side with that. He also sanitizes things that would be disparaging to important people in Tanakh.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Just stopping there for a moment.
Yeah, please.
You're saying it's Rabbi Yishmael who hold that, right?
Yes.
Is that then to imply that all these different... So according to Rabbi Yishmael, you couldn't necessarily darshan halacha out of every different linguistic turn of phrase.
Correct. That's what you'll get a machlokas in the Gemara between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva will say will darshan from the repetition of the phrase, and the Gemara will say, what does Rabbi Shmuel do with that repetition? And the Gemara will answer, he doesn't darshan that because Dibra Torah Kalashon B'nei Adam, it's just the way of the Torah to write an additional phrase. So there are times where the plain meaning of the text might sound disparaging. So the Torah Sarah actually describes herself as having withered, right? Now that I'm withered, am I going to return to my youthfulness, when she talks about having a child, right? Onkelos just says that she was old. He doesn't use that phrase to be withered or dried out. This he does. Maybe we can do the one in Shmos. On your own, I would tell you to look up the Onkelos translation to Shmos Chaf Pasuk Hey. No. Okay, something else I guess that's interesting to know about Onkelos. There's a Gemara, there's Yerushalmi that talks about a convert whose name was Aquila, who translated the Chumash into Greek. There are opinions, there's a discussion whether or not this Aquila and Onkelos are the same person who did either multiple translations or did one translation into the Greek that eventually became the Aramaic that we have. Okay. We talked about Yonatan ben Uziel. There's a commentary, there's a targum on the Chumash that you might find. Actually, let me get a microscope and see if we have it. Okay. This is your standard Mikros on Bereshis, and you've got Onkelos here next to the Psukim, and you've got Yonatan ben Uziel over here. The problem is that's not Yonatan ben Uziel. You might see this referred to as Targum HaMiyuchas LiYonatan ben Uziel, the Targum that's attributed to Yonatan ben Uziel, or in English, the Pseudo-Jonathan translation. The reason for this is this Targum is actually a Targum called Targum Yerushalmi. It's a different Targum. The printer saw the abbreviation Tet Yud and expanded that to Targum Yonatan as opposed to Targum Yerushalmi. But this Targum is an accepted Targum. It's a Targum Yerushalmi that includes a lot of midrashic material in it, but it was not. The consensus is that it was not authored by Yonatan ben Uziel. That is the second Targum that we have, like consensus that it was accepted. There's a third one that I'm definitely going to mispronounce, and that is Targum Neophiti. Yes, that is a real thing. It's another Targum that they found that also contains different midrashic material. It's on, I think they have like 400 folios. It's on most of the Chumash and parts of Tanakh as well. There are other Targumim that are just like the Apocrypha that are outside of the Jewish canon. Any takers on translations of the Torah that we don't hold by?
Septuagint?
Septuagint is a very good one. Septuagint comes from where?
I mean, the sages were forced to write it down.
Right, so Septuagint is 70.
Yeah.
So the Gemara talks about 70 Chachamim, 72 that were put into separate rooms by Ptolemy. So the Septuagint we can date to probably between the 3rd and 2nd century before the Common Era. Other Targumim that we have that we don't hold of, the Samaritan Torah has a Targum. There is another Targum that translated the Torah into Syriac. So this is Syriac was like the lingua franca of like the Mediterranean in, let's say, between the years, I don't know, 50 or 100 to about 300. So somewhere in there, there was a translation, and they still use that for some terms that people have a hard time explaining. The name for that Targum is called the Pshitata. In the 20th century, Rabbi Chaim Heller and Rabbi Chil Yaakov Weinberg did a lot of work on that Targum. And then in the, we'll say, late 4th century, there was a translation of the Torah into Latin. That was done by, bonus points, Jerome. So there were other translations. Yes, Jerome was one of the church fathers. He went back to the original Hebrew. So after the Septuagint, basically everybody just took the Septuagint and then did their translations from there. He went back to the original Hebrew and translated it into Latin, and that made it easily digestible for the population.
Oh, I thought you were going to say he translated it from the Septuagint back into Hebrew, which is like Google.
Yeah, right.
You translate it into different language and then translate it back, and it's just like it's just like a mess.
Yeah, the Targum HaMiyuchas LiYonatan, they know that is a fairly late Targum, meaning post 6th century, because there's actually references there to Muhammad's wife. They list the different wives of Yishmael, and one of them has the exact same name as one of the wives of Muhammad. So that's one of the ways that they date that to very late entry. Okay. Adkan the excursus on Targumim. Let's do a little bit. We can at least start
So who
our
was the one
Gemara-
who did the targum on Tanakh on
on Ketuvim, they don't know. They don't know. We have. I should pull it out. There's multiple targumim on the Megillot.
Who did the targum?
So right here you have Eov. And there's a targum to Eov. They don't know who is the author of that targum. You have Daniel. Does not have a targum, right?
Not all one person.
No,
It's
definitely not.
Aramaic.
Right.
That made it easy.
Right.
Well, they do it in Hebrew.
Yeah, and even the Hebrew is pretty easy in Daniel.
Doesn't
Ezra
say
Nehemiah
anything in
doesn't
here
have.
about Willy Wonka. This is
Nothing about what we want. Okay. So we'll take just a few minutes to at least get us started on these Gemarot. This is Sanhedrin. I want to say it's like the end of 96, and we'll do about 3 daf. I know the packet's a little thick, but that's because it's got the Hebrew, the Aramaic, and the English. What's that?
Okay, so we don't open you author for the Targum and Suva.
No.
Okay, so I was.
Yeah, no, we
well,
don't.
Maybe I thought.
To my knowledge.
Yeah, I certainly don't know that.
Okay. So Amar le Rav Nachman le Rav Yitzchak. Rav Nachman says to Rav Yitzchak, Mishmielach Amos Asi Bar Nefili. So I'm not going to support the Svaria translation over here of Bar Nefili as the son of giants. Bar Nefili is
son of the fallen ones.
Right. So that's how they get to the Nephilim, right? But we had the pasuk in Yeshaya as referring to Sukas David Hanopheles, right? That the fallen booth of David. So I believe that's what the Gemara is referring to over here. When is Bar Nefili, meaning the one whose booth has fallen? When is he coming? Meaning when is Moshiach coming? Amar le man Bar Nefili. Who is this Bar Nefili? Amar le Moshiach. Mashiach Bar Nefili Karisle. You're going to call Mashiach a Bar Nefili? Amar le in short Ichsiv by Yom Hahu Akim as Sukas David Hanopheles. On that day I will raise up the sukkah of David that has fallen. Amar le Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Dorsha ben David ba Bo Talmidei Chachamim Misma'atim. In the generation that Ben David, meaning Mashiach, will come, the Talmidei Chachamim are going to be less and less. V'hashar einehem kalos biyagon v'anacha v'tzaros rabos v'gzeros kashos mischadshos ad sharishona pekuda shniyam meheres lavo. And the rest of the people, their eyes are going to fail because they're going to be so full of grief. There's going to be so much trouble, and harsh decrees will be introduced. Before the first one passes, the second one comes quickly. And you're going to recognize all this because we actually read these psukim in Amos. This is exactly what was described in Amos. During the 7-year cycle, that's what it means, Shavua, the 7-year Shemitah cycle that Ben David is going to come. Bo Shana Rishona Miskayim Mikrazeh. Now we get the first pasuk from Amos. V'him tarti al irachas v'al irachas lo amtir shnia. So I'm going to cause rain to come down on one city, and the second city is not going to get any rain. Shnia in the second of those 7 years. Chetzi ra'av mishtalchin in the second year. So chitze ra'av or mishtalchin, that there's going to be arrows of famine that will be shot around. So certain places are going to have famine. It will come around in patches. Shlishis ra'av gadol umesim anashim v'nashim v'taf chasidim anshe ma'isa v'tar mishtacheches milom deha. In the third year, then it gets really bad. Many people are going to die. Men, women, young and old, chasidim, and people who learn Torah will die, and the Torah will be forgotten by those who study it. Revius shavua sova ve'eno sova. During the 4th year, there's going to be plenty, but it's still not going to be enough. Bechamishis sova gadol v'ochlim v'shosim v'smechim. In the 5th year, now it's starting to be enough. There's going to be satiation, and people are going to eat and drink and rejoice. V'torah chozer zlom deha, and the Torah will return. V'shishis kolos. In the 6th year, there's going to be sounds that are going to be heard. Min shamayim and b'shvius milchamos. In the 7th year, there will be war. V'motzei Shvius, and at the end of that 7-year cycle, Ben David Ba, that's when Mashiach will come. Amar Rav Yosef, ha kama Shvius Tahava. So Rav Yosef says, okay, I hear the pattern. It's going to start off really bad, and then it's going to get even worse, and then it's going to get much better. But says Rav Yosef, we've had plenty of cycles that are like that. Ha kama Shvius Tahava below Asa, and Mashiach didn't come during those times. So Amar Abai b'shishis kolos b'shvish milchamos mihava. So Abai says you're right. Everything followed the pattern except for the 6th and 7th year where you had these heavenly voices coming out. We haven't had that, and you haven't had like the major wars. That also hasn't happened. So therefore, you didn't have a full cycle. And also it didn't happen exactly in the pattern year after year the way it was just described. Tani Rabbi Yehuda Omer Dorsha ben David Bo Beis Havad Yel Nus V'Hagalil Yicharev V'Hagavlan Yashem V'Anshe Gvul Yisovavu Be'ir Le'ir V'Lo Yichananu V'Chachmas Hasofrim Tisrach V'Yorechet Yimasu U'Pnei Ador K'Pnei HaKelev. During the generation that Ben David will come, the halls of the assembly will be for a zona, and the Galil will be destroyed, and the Gavlon, which is Bashan, will be desolate, and the residents of the borders will circulate from city to city and get no sympathy. The wisdom of scholars will diminish, and sin-fearing will be despised, and the face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. Okay, who would like to take over for me for save my poor throat?
Okay. You want it in the Aramaic?
Whatever you want. Aramaic and English,
Sure,
just
if I
English.
Can do Aramaic.
So I'll keep reading. Va'emes na'aderes, and truth will be hemmed away. Shenemar v'tehi ha'emes na'aderes, and the truth will be lacking or cordoned off. My v'tehi ha'emes na'aderes. What does that mean? Amr debei Rav Melamed shenasis edarim v'holcheles la. It teaches that the truth will be like the many different flocks, and people are going to be walking away from it. My besar meira mishtolel. What does it mean that the evil will depart and be gone? Amr debei Reb Shila kol mi shesar meira mishtolel al habrios. It teaches us that anyone who goes away from evil is deemed like mishtolel, like a crazy person by everybody else. So it's going to become, we're going to normalize pursuing evil to the point where you're crazy not to. Amar Rava,
I could try.
Go for it.
I'll try. It's not going to be Amar Rava Miresh Hava Amina Leka Kushta Ba'alma. And Rava says, initially I would say that there's no truth in the world. Okay, Amar Liha Humi Rabbanan V'Rav Tavut Shemaya. Shemay. Okay, and there was a certain one of the rabbis, and Tavut is his name. Ba'amre la Rav Tavyumi Shemaya, and there are some who say his Tavyumi is his name. Ti'ihabu Yahweh le kol chale da'alma, and they said if they would give him all the desecrated of the world,
everything in the world,
everything in the world,
the whole kit and the
Lo
whole.
hava mishane bidvure, he wouldn't change his words.
Right, he wouldn't lie.
Okay, zim nechada, even one time.
No, zim nechada one time. Ikle. We're gonna put this truth into the test.
Iklai lahu atra b'kushta shemei v'lo havu mishane b'diburaihu. Okay, so one time it happened to come to a certain place, and truth is its name, and the residents would not deviate from the truth in their statements. V'lo hava meit inish mehatam, and no man would.
Zimna.
What?
Below
Zimna.
Right.
And no man would die before his time?
Correct.
Nisivi itita minahon vahavu li tartin banin mina. Okay, I married a woman from among them, and I had 2 sons from her. Okay, yom echad hava yatva debitu. Okay, one day his wife was sitting and washing her hair. Debitu b'ka chaipa reisha, and
right.
She was coming and washing her head. Atai Shibata Trefa Adasha. Okay. The neighbor came and knocked on the door. Okay. Savar Lav Orach Ara. She said it's not fitting. Amar La Lita Hacha Shechivo.
Lita
Le.
Hacha. She's not here. So the
Oh.
neighbor came. Right. She's bathing. So they said like right. Someone calls and says, "Is your parents home?" And mom's in the bathroom, but you don't want to say she's in the bathroom, so you say, "Oh, she's not home."
Right. Okay.
So shchivule.
Right.
Tartan b'nim.
Shchivule tartan banav. So since he deviated from the truth, his sons died. Atu inshe da'atra lekame amrule. My high. What is so?
What happened? No one dies early.
Right. Amrluhu hachi hava maser. Okay. Amarle bimituta minach puk me'atrin velo tagre buhu mutna bahanach inshe. So this was what happened. They said to him, "Please get out of here and do not provoke premature death on our people."
Right. You're not a good omen for us over here. Things were just fine until you showed up.
Uh-huh. Yikes. Okay, Tanya Rebbe Nahorai Omer. Dor sheben David ba bo na'arim yalbinu pnei zakenim. So in the generation that Mashiach comes, that Ben David comes, children will embarrass the elders. Zakenim yamdu lifnei na'arim, and the elders will stand in before the children. Ubat kama ba'ima, and a daughter stands.
She'll rebel.
Okay, against her mother.
Mm-hmm.
V'kala b'chumta, and a bride against her mother-in-law.
Correct.
Well, that's not so strange, is it? Upnei hador kipnei kelev, and the face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. Ve'in haben mityabesh me'aviv, and a son will not be ashamed before the father. Well, those last two are a little bit strange and difficult to understand.
Okay.
What does that mean? The face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. What does that really mean? You mean like everybody's gonna own a dog?
Thing. No. It's not. It's definitely not a positive thing.
Right, but what specifically does that mean? Like how am I to understand that? You're gonna say we're all just lousy, or is it specifically one thing? Why do they chose a dog? Why do they say it'll be like the face of a beetle, or
Right.
It just represents low level.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I mean, I understand. I mean, look.
I know they're cute.
The bride against the mother-in-law is something that I have difficulty with, because the Mishnah says that the people who naturally hate each other are the bride and the mother-in-law.
Right.
And
that doesn't mean that they're that they have the temerity to be chutzpahdik to the mother-in-law.
And look, you know what? You could say a son will not be ashamed before the father. Like, you can interpret this positively, the youth will humiliate. You could say this is the Baal Tshuva movement. This passage.
For sure.
Okay.
For sure,
youth will humiliate the elders. Like, you guys discarded the Torah wholesale. Guess what? We're going back to it now. You got to stand before us because we're rabbis now.
Okay.
And guess what? The daughter's going to rebel against her mother, because guess what? I'm going to wear tznius clothing. You don't want to wear it. I am going to wear it. The bride, the daughter rebel against the mother, the bride against the mother-in-law. Okay, you guys weren't a religious generation. I'm going to be religious, The face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. A dog could be as a kelev. It's like a dog is like a heart. Maybe we're going to have instead of maybe the generation is going to be serving Hashem with fire instead of mitzvahs and nashim melumada. Okay, and a son won't be ashamed before his father. Guess what? I'm religious and I'm having a Torah from life. And
excellent.
If you don't want to do that, that's that.
Let's do one more.
I prefer to l'shevach v'lo l'ganai.
Excellent. Let's do one more and we'll stop for tonight.
Okay, Tanya Rebbe Nechemia Omer, Dorsha ben David Babo Ha'azut, okay.
Azuz tirbet.
Tirbet, okay. So, brazenness will increase.
Yes.
V'hayoker yaut v'hagefen yitin pirio.
Hayoker yaut. It's gonna be crazy expensive.
Oh, Okay,
Pretty
by
sure.
Geffen Yitain Pirio, and the grapevine will yield its grape. The Hayayin Biyukar, but the wine's going to be very expensive.
Correct.
The Nefcha Kol Hamalchut, and the kingship will be turned over.
Yeah. What will they turn to? Next word.
Leminot, oh, to Christianity. Okay. The Ein Tucha
Tochacha.
Messiah lay. Okay, and rebuke will not help them. Le Rebbe Yitzchak, the Amar Rebbe Yitzchak, Ein ben David ba ad shetit hafach kol hamalchut leminot. He said the same thing, that the Mashiach will not come until all of the kings will be heretics. Amar Rava, my crop, kulo hafach libo tahor.
Lavan.
Oh,
Tahorhu.
lavan tahorhu.
Right.
So
By Mitzora. If a person gets saras in a spot here or there, then they have to
right, but if
quarantine
the entire
their
body
impure.
becomes saraz, he's tahor,
Correct.
which is a weird halacha. It's
Correct.
just like that weird one where the Sanhedrin rules like unanimously guilty,
Right,
the
then
guy
he can-
goes free.
Right.
You know, it's that is a very. I'm sure there's deep mysteries in that concept.
Well, just on the very surface level, if not a single person can find a different perspective on the case, then there's a problem.
Why?
Because
Why is it so hard that it's an open and shut case? Like that's what
because
bothers me.
because if it came to the Sanhedrin, it had nuance, and if that nuance is not represented in the judgment of 70 people, then there's something wrong with that judgment. If you can get 12 angry men on like what was a clear open and shut case, you got to have between 70 Jews in the highest court. There's a reason that it came to the highest court, and to not see that reason whatsoever, to have nobody have a different perspective, tells you there's something not,
I mean, maybe they just need to get rid of that dude.
okay.
Wow, you made it all the way through to the end of this year. Thank you. These series are a passion of mine, and a lot of effort goes into them. I'd be grateful for your help in spreading the awareness to others. If you're interested in joining us live, getting the notes, or asking a question, please message me on Twitter at Isaacson, ISAACSON. Thanks.